Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, the show where we cut through cybersecurity noise and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and your business. This podcast is built around one core idea: cyber fusion. A cyber fusion center brings together IT security, operational technology, engineering insight, and human risk into a single coordinated defense strategy. So threats are detected earlier, response is faster, and operation stays running. Each episode, we sit down with security leaders, operators, and industry experts to unpack the real threats facing modern organizations, especially where cyber risk becomes operational risk. No hype, no theory, just practical insight on cyber resilience, operational continuity, and defending critical systems without disruption. If you're responsible for uptime, safety, or business continuity, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome to the Cyber Fusion Report, where we cut through cybersecurity theory and focus on what actually protects operations, infrastructure, and the business. I'm your host, Gary Mullen. Today we're talking about something many organizations claim to have achieved, but very few have truly implemented, and that's cyber fusion. Breaking down silos between IT, OT, and threat intelligence sounds straightforward. In reality, org charts, budgets, KPIs, reporting structures, and a number of other things often reinforce the very separation that we're trying to eliminate. To unpack what cyber fusion looks like in practice, I'm joined today by the three Chris's yet again, three professionals who bring decades of experience aligning security with operational realities in industrial environments, and they live this every day. Chris Weule, Director of Operational Technologies, Cyber Fusion, and Strategy. Chris Wightman, Senior OT Threat Hunter, and Chris Mosley, OT Threat Detection and Response Analyst. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today. In this episode, we will challenge a few assumptions. Where does cyber fusion actually break down first? What does real collaboration look like during an unfolding attack? Why does so much threat intelligence never actually influence action? And what does proactive defense really mean beyond patching and alerting? Most importantly, we'll explore the first practical step organizations like yours can take to move towards cyber fusion without having to restructure the entire company. So let's dive into it. Mr. Weule, as always, the first question comes to you. Most organizations say they want cyber fusion, but as I said in the opening, their org charts, their budgets, the KPIs that they are required to deliver to still reinforce those silos. Where does cyber fusion break down first in the real world?
This is such an important question to start with because it gets to the root of why so many fusion initiatives stall out. And the honest answer, fusion almost always breaks down at the budget line first. Before it ever fails technically, it fails financially and organizationally. Here's what I mean. You can put IT security, OT security, and threat intelligence all in the same room. You can even give them a shared Slack channel and weekly sync meetings. But if IT security reports up through the CIO, and your OT security reports through the VP of operations, and threat intel reports through a CISO who doesn't control either of the other two's budgets, you haven't fused anything. You've created a coordination layer on top of three separate kingdoms that are built out of sand. The KPI problem is just as real. If IT security team is measuring their mean time to patch, and the OT team is measuring uptime and availability and productivity, and threat intel is measuring the number of reports they publish on a daily basis, every single one of those is going to be optimizing for their own metric, right? Each team is looking to show that they're doing the best that they possibly can, and that would directly conflict with another team's KPIs. So patching aggressively can threaten OT uptime. Prioritizing availability means that vulnerabilities stay in production, and publishing more intel reports doesn't mean anyone actually reads them or changes a detection rule because of them. It's just bean counter rhetoric. So where does it break down first? It breaks down at ownership. Nobody owns that seam that goes between the IT and OT from a security perspective. There's usually a clear line that defines where IT responsibility ends and OT responsibility begins. And that gap, that seam between them is exactly where attackers operate. They don't care what your org chart looks like. They don't care about the paths that you have between communications. They care about that path of least resistance. And that path almost always runs right through the boundary that nobody fully owns. The organizations that actually make Fusion work are the ones that create a shared risk ownership model. That doesn't mean that everyone reports to the same person necessarily, but it means that there's a single point of accountability for cross-domain risk. Someone who can look at a threat that starts in IT and moves to OT and say, this is my problem to coordinate, and I have the authority to get the right people acting together. Until you solve the ownership and incentivize that alignment, all the collaboration tools and joint workshops in the world aren't going to get you to real fusion. The org chart just doesn't have the org chart isn't necessarily going to ever have to be perfect, but the accountability structure needs to be perfect.
So in a not my job or not my KPI mindset world, cyber fusion just doesn't work. Everybody talks about IT, OT, threat intelligence, collaboration. In reality, it rarely happens that way. But what does it actually look like day to day when an attack is unfolding, and where does it usually fall apart?
Everyone loves that word, collaboration, right? It shows up in every strategy deck. It shows up at every board presentation. But when an attack is actually unfolding, when you're in the middle of an incident that's crossing between that IT and OT boundary, collaboration isn't a feeling, it's a mechanism. Either you have the connective tissue in place to move information and decisions fast, or you don't. Let me paint a picture of what actually looks like without fusion. The SOC detects something anomalous in the IT network. They open up a ticket, they start their investigation. Meanwhile, the same threat actor has already pivoted through a shared service or some poorly segmented connection into the OT environment. But the OT team doesn't know yet because they have different monitoring tools, different dashboards, and they weren't on the initial alert distribution. By the time someone thinks to call the OT team, and it's usually a phone call or an email, not an automated workflow, the attacker has had hours of dwell time in the OT environment, and you're now playing catch up. The OT team is trying to understand what happened in the IT side, and the IT team is trying to understand the OT team's architecture. The threat intel is scrambling to figure out if this matches some known campaign. Everybody's working hard, but they're working in parallel without some level of shared context. An excellent example of this from one of our previous clients included a leadership model where I couldn't pass the workflow from the IT team over to the OT team's side until I had made a full determination of what had already been compromised and what was the attack path, rather than trying to go ahead and segment off so that we could go ahead and stop the flow and pivot between systems. We had to justify why we were impacting somebody else's time. So where a lot of this fails most consistently is that handoff, the moment where information needs to move from one team to another. You hit friction. Different ticketing systems, different escalation procedures, different communications channels. The IT team might use ServiceNow. The OT team uses a completely different system, or they might just still be using spreadsheets. Threat intel might publish to a platform that the SOC barely checks during an active incident because they don't have time, they're trying to investigate. What real collaboration looks like in a fused environment is fundamentally different. There are pre-built playbooks that define exactly what happens when an incident crosses one domain to another. There's a shared communication channel that activates automatically. Threat intel isn't waiting to be asked. They're already correlating indicators against known campaigns and then pushing the context to the responders in real time. The Fusion Center acts as an incident coordination platform, a given focal point, ensuring that IT and OT responders have shared mutual situational awareness from 1 minute to the next, not starting at hour 3. The biggest difference is speed. In a siloed model, cross-domain incidents take hours to even recognize as being cross-domain. In a fusion model, that recognition happens in minutes because the data, the people, the processes, they're already connected and you're already working through that playbook. Collaboration isn't something that you schedule, it's something that you build and engineer from the ground up.
So there are many companies out there that are selling threat intelligence, right? And they're making pretty good revenue off of selling that data. But so often, so little of that threat intelligence actually gets to the people that can use it, meaning that it's rarely used. Uh, Mr. Mosley, why does so much of this threat intelligence that they're paying good money for never actually influence detection or response when an attack happens? And how does cyber fusion change that from kind of this passive intelligence scheme to active defense?
So a lot of what happens, in my opinion, is that I guess it's not an opinion, it's a fact. A lot of what happens when you have this issue of threat intelligence going out, a lot of it gets ignored. And I could probably, if I was a betting man, I'd bet money that more of the threat intel, those documents that get sent out, those 10-page documents, more of them get ignored than get read. And that's part of the problem, that no, like, they're not getting read, and then they're not getting, people aren't real understanding what they're actually explaining and how to implement them into a fix. A lot of the SOC teams are too busy uh, handling incidents and alerts to go ahead and read this document on, hey, also this threat could be happening. How can we fix it? So it leaves a lot of the CTI teams and the those companies, like you said, that deliver these reports, kind of talking to a wall, right? They're shooting information out, and nobody's responding to it. Nobody's getting anything out of it. The problem isn't the intel. It, like, all of it's great. It's factual, it's correct, it's accurate. But like I said, nobody's getting to it. It's not getting translated from the intelligence into, like, operational action that people can use. Um, it's one of the reasons why we try to push for, the Cyber Fusion Center that we keep bringing up here, because in a lot of places it fixes that main gap there, because in the Fusion Center you don't have this siloed approach where, like Chris was saying, where it takes hours for any one response to come through from the IT side to the OT side. Where in this case, um, it's not hours, but it's the CTI team produces a result, and then there's just no feedback coming from the other side of, did you read this? Was it informative? Was it helpful? Was anything done about it? Whereas with the more fused approach, um, the CTI team and all the other teams involved can kind of collectively take a look at this report and they get immediate feedback on, oh, this was helpful, or here's how the threat hunters have used this information, or here's how we've used this to improve our workflows and our automation. So a lot of the difference becomes between using those siloed models and the Fusion Center is the speed, but also it comes down to what I'm looking for, functional results. The CTI teams aren't trying to sit there and produce these intelligence reports just because. They're trying to make people alert of actual situations, actual problems that are out there, and oftentimes those do go ignored. And by implementing the fusion model, we can produce intelligence that changes behaviors and results in better detection rules, in a better hunts, better playbooks, or different prioritizations when it comes to like remediation steps. And that just oftentimes doesn't happen. If the threat intelligence program can't pinpoint to like a specific operational change, hey, here's a problem, but we don't have a way to implement it, it's not really getting anything drove in or anything done. So yeah, it's not like I said, the goal is not to produce more intelligence. It's not to it is to have intelligence, not to just research. And the Fusion Center kind of helps to fix a lot of those gaps that we're seeing.
Okay, great. Mr. Wightman, you've been quiet so far, so let me throw a question your way, just to wake you up over there. We talk about proactive, and I think that means different things to different organizations. But when organizations claim that they're actually proactive in their defense, what are they really doing? And how is it different from what a real proactive defense stance looks like in a fused environment?
I love how we do this on this show. We really like pick apart these common industry terms like collaboration and proactive and how we have known them to be used. And then, like, it's almost like the Princess Bride, like inconceivable. You keep using that word, but I'm not sure you know what it means. So I think a lot of organizations use the word proactive, but it's usually in the context of improving upon a process or something they're already doing. And I've heard of that referred to as just running faster on the same treadmill. So we're proactively we're doing continuous vulnerability scanning, and we're reducing the time it takes us to patch, and that's proactive. Or we're proactively identifying alerts that are providing a lot of false positives, and we're tuning them. Or we're actively and proactively searching CTI, to find applicable information, actual information. The truth is that all of those are reactive. The release of a new CVE or the publication of a new update to software you own, that's still reactive. There's a trigger there. Identifying high false positives, that's probably because an analyst told you this alert stinks. Can we get with the detection engineers and try to fix this? And they're like, yeah, we're proactively tuning our detections. And then with CTI, you're searching for information, but you're not creating information. You're not finding vulnerabilities. You're not finding 0 days or developing exploits. You're reacting to something that's already been published by somebody else. As a threat hunter, the threat hunt perspective is a lot of organizations will claim, yeah, we are proactive. We have a threat hunt. We do threat hunt. What that typically means, in my experience, is that their tier 2s and their tier 3s are allowed to threat hunt or conduct some sort of threat hunt when they have time. I don't know many tier 2s and tier 3s that have a ton of empty time. To be honest, like they're usually busy from clock in to clock out, and still have a backlog, right? Typically, by some chance, if they do get a breather and they want to do some threat hunt, it's ad hoc. You know, it's usually based on recently published CTI, usually based on IOCs. So it becomes more of an activity that they do occasionally, and it's not a proactive capability. And it's really minimally effective from the threat hunt perspective. So to your question, when it comes to like fusion centers, in my opinion, just the act of developing a fusion center model is proactive defense. We all know the frequency and the speed at which threat actors attack. It's constantly increasing, and organizations need to do the preparation, the proactive preparation for themselves, so they can move at the same speed as an attack, or what they would expect an attack to be. When you're developing a fusion center, you're doing new things. You're not always refining or replacing your old processes across the board or your old technology. You're creating new connective tissue, new processes, new communication channels that are enhancing things that weren't there before, that improve the overall posture, response capabilities, the speed of response and detection. So I would consider that proactive. Those things involved spending the time and making the investment to do data integration. Typically doesn't exist. Why can't we have vuln management, asset management, HR information, and cybersecurity telemetry all in the same scene, all in the same database that's searchable? You can visualize it, and have that platform that feeds multiple groups for multiple reasons, maybe different reasons for every group. But as Wiley mentioned earlier, aside from the data, you're creating these fused playbooks, and you're saying, this is how we can react faster and more effectively when an attack happens. That's preparation. That's proactivity to me. And as you establish it, then you start refining it. But if it doesn't exist currently, that's your next step to maturity, to be building these things. As with all these things, especially new processes and mechanisms, you have to test them before an incident happens. You don't just assume they work. Tabletops are cool and all, talking it through, they have their purpose, and that's fine, but they don't necessarily teach you how you're actually going to respond in the event of an actual attack. So that's why, we think there should be, within a fusion center and proactive defense and identification of flaws, regular red team assessments, where a team's coming in, they're acting as an actual threat actor. Very realistic. It's threat emulation, essentially. And the difference between that and pen testing and red team assessments and pen testings. Pen testing is going to tell you, okay, we found all these vulnerabilities that are still open. They could be exploited, but they won't show you how and what the impact of exploiting a single vulnerability is. Whereas a red team assessment chains these vulnerabilities and they work your way through the network. At the same time, you're evaluating, are we detecting any of this? If we do, how are we responding? This would obviously be coordinated through a CFC, and at some point, the teams would be informed that this is red team activity, but still go through the paces. So at that point, it becomes more of a purple team if the red team gets caught. So proactively conducting the adversary simulations on your own network is invaluable. You're going to learn things that, like this enterprise intelligence, that you wouldn't know otherwise. So now you're generating organic intelligence, and that's proactive. And all this should be done under the CFC umbrella, in my opinion. And all of this is in preparation, right? You want to train for the fight, so you're ready when that bell actually rings, and that's being proactive.
I have to ask, since you mentioned getting caught, Chris Weile, you've done a lot of red teaming in your career. How many times have you gotten caught?
Ooh. Caught. So honestly, detection is usually one of the weakest links in that whole chain. So when we're doing red teaming, we don't often get caught. We actually generally have to go knocking on the door pretty loudly. We ramp up and we go, okay, well, I'm doing my normal scanning, I'm doing my normal enumeration of the systems, and the detection just isn't there, especially once you're in the network. It's always at the border, right? And even then, the borders aren't, they're kind of porous. They're porous intentionally. So I would say that in my history of doing red teaming, I don't get caught often until it becomes an intentional. Let's see how loud we can get before they detect us, and that we are trying to see how refined that detection set is. And realistically speaking, but that's always one of those things that I really want to help organizations with, is making sure that the detection engineering, the detection logic, as fed by that threat intelligence that Mosley was talking about, right? Making sure that the CTI stuff becomes detection, regardless of whether or not somebody's already attacking your system. But like, hey, a new threat intelligence report came out. Let's implement this now, so we're not looking later to see threat hunt wise if somebody's already in the system using those IOCs. But yeah, we don't get caught very often.
And there's not too many attackers that knock loudly on the front door either. So
Low and slow.
Wightman, I want to come back to you once again for this question, because I think it kind of follows up a little bit to what you were talking about. We talk about the silos, specifically between IT and OT, and quite often there is, if not a physical wall, there's a mental wall between the IT and the OT folks. And when an incident does happen, what happens? Who actually has the authority to act on that, particularly when it, perhaps starts in IT and then crosses over into OT and begins to impact operations? And how does Cyber Fusion actually prevent the delays that would be caused from that very unclear ownership when an event does happen?
Yeah, it's there's a huge challenge, especially in the scenario of uh, when an attack does become cross-domain. Um, it's one of the most critical questions, and most organizations can't answer it. Uh, and then you start getting delays. Like if they don't have the answer off the bat, now they are somewhat hobbled because they're trying to figure it out as the attack is occurring. It slows them down, and it gives the attacker more time to burrow even deeper and cause maybe potentially greater effects uh, in your environment. So when we describe how this kind of occurs, typically most attacks on an OT network are going to start within the IT environment. If they get detected, they get identified, then the SOC, IT SOC, they've got their playbooks, their run books. They know what they're doing. They're very practiced at it. They've done it before, and that's all good. They know their lane and their responsibilities, what to do. The second they trace that pathway and like, oh, he went to a jump box. I say he. So the attacker went to a jump box or engineering workstation or maybe a historian, and they are now moving laterally into the OT network. So this is when the SOC doesn't really have much visibility, never mind authority. In the IT network, they might have some authority. They know they can shut down a computer or isolate a computer, or they can cut a network off for a little while. Maybe they have that authority. That might be something that they're used to doing. It's part of their playbooks, depending on the type of attack. The second it crosses that barrier into OT, the SOC typically doesn't have visibility or familiarity with the OT network. So likely and appropriately, they shouldn't have any authority to take any action within that OT environment because they don't know what the impacts of those decisions may be from a safety and security standpoint. So now you've got like two teams. They're each responsible for the two sides. SOC's good. They know it went over here. OT is starting to see it once they're informed by the SOC, possibly. And they start coordinating. They call their managers. It goes up to the director. Director starts a call bridge, tries to get them all together and start talking and having these discussions of like, what do we do now? Or can we do this? Or can't we do that? And that's all friction. That's all delay. And again, getting back to, giving the attackers more time. And when you talk about mean time to respond, or mean time to remediate, that's all of it. You can't get isolation with that kind of complexity and bureaucracy. And that's where kind of the Cyber Fusion Center comes in. When you create these, when you have a fused organization, you have fused playbooks, all that is defined. Who has decision authority over what parts in the network, depending on where the attack goes. If it stays squarely in the SOC, that's very clear. That's normal. If it goes to OT, then it's up to the CFC, the director, essentially the incident manager, in this case, knows who the system owners are, or already knows who to contact and explains to them what the situation is and gets feedback on what is a potential impact of, these possible responses, whether it's shut it down, isolate it, whatever that may be. And then that information, that context from the people that actually know is pre-designed. Sometimes there's pre-authorization. If this happens, you are allowed to automatically do this, and that drastically cuts down some of the response activities. But either way, just by having Fusion and a framework of how it's communicated, how context is provided from both sides, allows a single, designee to make a decision based on expert information. The processes are predefined, the authority is pre-delegated, and there's situational awareness all around. It's just speed at which you can respond, and it's coordinated, expected, fluid response, which makes it a rapid response. And you also have to test these playbooks through tabletop testing. You always have to test it through tabletops, red team assessments, attack emulation. The first time you exercise these playbooks can't be the next time you get attacked.
Can I add something to that? Right.
Please.
While Wightman's sitting here talking, I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm going, all right. So predefined authorization for certain types of responses. We know that, say, in a nuclear power plant, the OT team, within certain guidelines, if a thing happens, I need to go ahead and scram the reactor, or I need to be able to shut things down so things don't escalate beyond a certain point. In a fused environment, we have already worked out that playbook of what is the threshold at which you act inside that OT environment. When do I go ahead and I cross into that boundary of I need to isolate this system? And when is that, not an option? If there are trains running and there are passengers on trains, do you really want to impact ridership? Just because there's, the possibility of an email phishing attempt. The answer probably is no. If we turn around and we say that phishing attempt has now compromised, all of the detection circuits within the network, you probably want to go ahead and institute some level of segmentation immediately. And there should be that ability and that pre-authorized step for when you want to act, but you should already know that. The idea behind a cyber fusion center is that you're proactively looking for how can I go ahead and limit damage ahead of time, not react to it after the fact. So you're trying to engineer the environment so that it has those safety mechanisms in place that engineers look at when it comes to OT equipment, right? And you're trying to engineer ahead of time that the network has breakpoints and safety mechanisms in place so that you can fail over safely.
Well, I've been watching season 2 of the series Hijacked, and I can honestly say you do not want to impact the movement of the trains when they have people on them, because they will blow up. At least in that series, not in real life. Great. So the last question, Mr. Weule, comes to you, and this will close us out for this episode of the podcast. But I think this is where we get down to where kind of the rubber meets the road for a lot of organizations. If an organization wants to move towards cyber fusion without blowing up their organization or buying another platform or tool, what's the first practical step that they need to take that's actually going to deliver value?
So I'm going to say that this is my favorite question because it's the one that actually matters most to most organizations listening right now. The big Fusion Center vision is great, but the reality is that most organizations can't restructure overnight. They can't blow up their org chart. They don't have the budget for new platforms. So what do you do Monday morning after you have listened to someone talk to you about Fusion Centers? The first step, and I genuinely believe this, is a cross-domain asset and risk mapping exercise. The idea that you can't protect what you don't know, right? So it's not a new tool, it's not a reorg, it's not a structured convert. It's not about the what you can spend money on. It's what do I have in my environment now, so you can map the critical assets that span both environments, understand the crown jewels, identify the connections between IT and OT, and document who currently owns that piece of the picture. Why is this first? Well, that's because you can't protect what you don't understand, what you don't know. And in almost every organization that we work with, there's a gap in shared understanding of how IT and OT are actually connected. Not how the network diagram says they're connected. Hey, as-builts are kind of more important than what was conceptually what I wanted to have done. But how does data and access actually flow between two environments? You'd be surprised at how many times the IT team doesn't know about connections into OT, and the OT team doesn't fully understand their exposure to the IT side threats. This exercise of sitting down and mapping out those risks doesn't require a new tool. It requires a room and a whiteboard and the right people willing to honestly look at and say what they know and what they don't. Map your critical assets, map the connections, identify the gaps in visibility, and most importantly, identify the gaps in ownership, the places where risk exists, but nobody currently owns it. What comes out of that exercise is incredibly powerful. You gain a shared picture of cross-domain risk. You identify the highest priority gaps that are usually that seam that I was talking about that exists between those teams. And you start to build relationships that are the foundation of Fusion. Because at the end of the day, Fusion isn't a technology problem, it's cultural. It's a people and process problem first. I got to say that I sat in on some tabletop exercises, and I don't know, maybe Mosley was in on one of these also, but we sat on a tabletop exercise, and we had a client that turned around and said, "Oh yeah, we would just go ahead and we would react to that detection, and immediately when that detection comes over from the platform that we're using in the OT environment." We would go ahead and begin an investigation inside the OT network for what was causing that. And I sat there kind of diffidently at first, and then I raised my hand and I was like, we don't have any alerts for that. We can't detect that. Well, why can't we detect that? We have a tool. Yeah, but it's not tuned for that. And not only is it not tuned for that, the systems that we're talking about aren't feeding data to that tool. So we're blind right there. And they're like, well, how can that be? Why are you blind? I don't own that system. I don't even know who owns that system. So the idea is to start building those relationships. From there, the next practical step is to pick one high value case and build a fused playbook around it. Just one, right? Maybe it's ransomware that could cross from IT to OT, right? Thinking back to, say like a Merck compromise, right? Maybe it's a compromised vendor account that has access to both environments, right? With that third party, access, right? Pick one scenario, bring the relevant teams together, and build a playbook that defines roles, communications channels, decision authorities, and response actions across domains. Then test it like Wightman was talking about. Test it with a tabletop exercise. That's your starting point. No platform required, no reorg needed, just a shared understanding and a shared ownership and a commitment to build that connective tissue one use case at a time. The idea is to begin becoming one team, right? One organization rather than a series of silos, right? Organizations that start here build momentum because every exercise, every playbook, every cross-domain conversation makes the next one easier and faster. There's a gained understanding by continuing to do those, those fusion exercises that allows for the next one to have a better synergy, right? You build momentum. And that's how fusion actually starts. Not with a grand strategy, but with a first step that delivers real value.
So it doesn't start with what new tool should I buy to make this happen.
Never.
And I think that's an important point for people to understand. When you were talking about tools a moment ago, it reminded me of a report that Hewlett Packard put out many years ago, and of course it was to pitch their network management platform. But the title of the report was "A Fool with a Tool is Still a Fool," uh, implying that the tool is only as good as the person that's actually using it to accomplish something, right? And in this case, it's the collection of people and processes, shared information, shared data that's making the difference.
Gary, I got to say that I taught for a long time, and people would always ask like, well, do you know how to use this tool, or hey, what experience do you have on this other tool? And I always used to state to them that it's just a tool. Do you understand the theory and can you apply it? And because if it's theory and application, then I can go ahead and say what is the theory behind incident management? And then the incident management tool becomes kind of irrelevant, right? Is it Splunk? Is it Elastic? Is it a Dragos? Is it something else? The idea is that if you understand the events coming in and the tool can provide you the relevant data visualization, then one tool is the same as the next, right? It's not the tool, it's making sure that you aren't the fool, right? Do you have that theory and application that you can apply to the environment?
That sounds like a paper you should write, Chris. It's not the tool, it's making sure you're not the fool. But we'll leave it at that. We'll wrap today's episode. Once again, I thank the three Chris's for joining us today, giving us some real perspective on the realities of what cyber fusion is and what it's not. As we close, here's the reality we want everyone to understand. Cyber fusion is not a platform. It's not a dashboard. It's not a tool. It's not a workshop or a slide deck. It's clarity. Clarity about how risk flows across IT and OT. Clarity about who has authority to act when an incident happens. Clarity about whether threat intelligence actually changes detection and response in your organization. When organizations say they want proactive defense, what they really need is alignment. Alignment between data, people, intelligence, and decision making. Fusion does not begin with technology. I think we've made that point clear here today. It begins with ownership. If today's conversation made you rethink how your teams collaborate, how your intelligence is used, or who truly owns cross-domain risk, then this episode has done its job. I'm Gary Mullen. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. This has been the Cyber Fusion Report podcast. Thanks for joining us, and for more information, please visit www.fishcloud.com or email us at cfc@fishcloud.com. Thanks and have a great day.